The lawyer cleared his throat, a dry rasping sound in the over-warm, airless room. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of afternoon sun slanting through the window, illuminating the worn patches on the Persian rug. Anya watched them, her hands folded in the lap of her black wool dress, the fabric a stark and unyielding presence against her skin. She did not look at her late husband's brother, Marcus, or his wife, Beatrice, who sat opposite her, their chairs creaking under the weight of their impatience. The will was a formality, a final piece of theatre before the real transfer of power. Mr. Henderson adjusted his spectacles, the paper crinkling in his hands. To my brother, Marcus Thorne, I leave the entirety of the Thorne Cattle Ranch, its holdings, its livestock, and all accounts associated with its operation. Marcus nodded slowly, a somber, proprietary expression settling on his face. Beatrice allowed a small, tight smile to touch her lips before smoothing it away. The lawyer droned on, listing assets, parcels of land in the valley, the house in town with its heavy velvet curtains and polished silver. It was a litany of a life Anya had occupied but never truly possessed. Then, the final clause. And to my wife, Anya Thorne, the lawyer paused, his gaze flicking towards her for the first time with something akin to pity. I leave the parcel of land designated as Lot 73, known colloquially as the Barrens, and its contents, to be hers in perpetuity. A silence descended, thicker than the dust. The Barrens. A jagged piece of mountain, all rock and wind, worthless for grazing, impossible to farm, riddled with caves that were said to be bottomless. A place of geological refuse. Beatrice broke the quiet, her voice like glass shards. Well, I suppose every creature needs a place to burrow. You should be quite at home there, dear. Among the rocks and the bats. Marcus shot her a warning look, not of kindness, but of decorum. The performance was not yet over. Anya felt the heat of their stares, the weight of their condescension. She had been married to Thomas for 6 years, a quiet arrangement made by their families. In all that time, she had remained an outsider. Now, at 24, she was a widow with an inheritance of stone. She finally lifted her gaze from the swirling dust and met the lawyer's eyes. Her voice, when it came, was low and even, without a tremor of the fury or despair they expected. I accept. She stood, the movement fluid and deliberate. Mr. Henderson slid the deed across the polished mahogany desk. She took it, folded the crisp paper, and placed it inside her worn reticule. She did not look at Marcus or Beatrice again. She simply turned and walked from the room, her back straight, leaving them to the comfortable warmth of their inheritance, the sound of the door closing behind her with a soft, final click. The journey was a slow, grinding ascent into silence. Anya led the single-pack mule, its hooves striking sharp reports against the stone-littered trail. The lush valley floor, with its green pastures and the silver ribbon of the river, fell away behind her, shrinking into a map of a life that was no longer hers. Up here, the air thinned and cooled, carrying the scent of pine and cold rock. The trees grew sparse, their trunks twisted and bent by a wind that never seemed to stop. This was the Barrens. It was not a name given in jest, it was a simple statement of fact. The land was a chaotic jumble of granite escarpments, scree slopes, and deep, shadowed fissures. Nothing grew but wiry grasses and lichen that clung to the rocks like patches of old rust. By the second day, she reached the approximate center of the plot marked on her deed. Before her yawned the mouth of a cave, a dark wound in the mountainside, larger than the others she had passed. This would be the place. She unpacked the mule, her movements economical and practiced. Her worldly possessions were few: a bedroll, 2 cast-iron pots, a sack of flour, another of beans, a small crate of books, and a lantern with a precious tin of oil. She did not weep. Tears were a luxury, a currency she could not afford to spend. The cold was the first thing she had to understand. It was a living entity in the cave, a presence that seeped from the stone itself. She built a small fire near the entrance, its light pushing back the immense darkness but doing little to warm the deep, ancient chill of the rock. That first night, wrapped in her bedroll, she listened to the sounds of her inheritance. The moan of the wind across the cave's mouth, the distant skitter of some unseen creature, the profound, unnerving silence of the mountain's deep interior. She was utterly and completely alone. The world had cast her out, sent her to this place of ruin, and she had come. She lay there, not in despair, but in a state of quiet assessment. This was the starting point. This stone, this cold, this darkness. This was the ground upon which she would either break or build. The fire crackled, a tiny spark of defiance against the overwhelming void. She closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to think. Days turned into a week, then two. Her life found a stark rhythm, dictated by the sun and the cold. Foraging for scrub wood, rationing her food, and, most importantly, exploring. The cave was not one chamber, but a network, a labyrinth of passages carved by ancient water. With her lantern held high, she mapped the darkness, her boots crunching on the dusty floor. She was searching for water, a reliable source that did not depend on the infrequent rains. Deeper she went, into the belly of the mountain, the air growing still and heavy. The passages narrowed, forcing her to squeeze through tight fissures in the rock. It was in the deepest part of her exploration, a place where the sound of the wind was a forgotten memory, that she first felt it. A change in the air. A subtle, damp warmth that seemed to rise from the floor. It was wrong. Everything in this mountain was cold, a repository of ancient ice and shadow. Yet, here was a hint of something else. She followed the feeling, her hand trailing along the wall. The rock itself was no longer frigid to the touch, it held a faint, residual heat. The air grew thick with humidity, carrying a strange, mineral scent, like wet earth and metal. She came to a wall of crumbly, water-stained rock that blocked a narrow passage. A trickle of warm moisture seeped from a crack near its base. Her heart, a slow and steady drum in her chest, began to beat faster. She returned to her camp for the pickaxe that had come with the mule. For an entire day, she worked in the cramped passage, the rhythmic chip-chip-chip of steel on stone the only sound. The rock was soft, rotten with moisture. It gave way in chunks, revealing not another dark passage, but a hollow space beyond. With a final, wrenching blow, a section of the wall collapsed inward with a splash. Steam, thick and white, billowed out, swirling in the beam of her lantern. She shielded her face, the humid air hot against her skin. When it cleared, she stepped through the opening and stopped. The chamber was a perfect dome, vast and cathedral-like. From a wide fissure in the ceiling, a single, pure shaft of daylight poured down, illuminating a scene of impossible beauty. In the center of the chamber was a pool, its water a startling, luminous turquoise, so clear she could see the smooth, white stones of its floor. Steam rose from its surface in gentle waves, warming the entire cavern. She had not found a trickle of water. She had found the mountain's heart. The discovery of the spring changed the calculus of survival. The first winter descended upon the barrens with a savage fury, burying the landscape in a deep shroud of snow and ice. The wind howled a constant, mournful dirge. Outside the cave, the world was a study in brutal, frozen stillness. But inside, in the network of chambers warmed by the geothermal heart of the mountain, life was not only possible, it was strangely comfortable. Anya moved her camp from the cold, wind-lashed entrance to a smaller, dry cavern adjacent to the great pool. The ambient heat kept the air temperate, a constant, gentle warmth that seeped into her bones and drove away the gnawing chill. The steam from the spring condensed on the cooler rock walls, creating a perpetual source of fresh, clean water that she collected in her pots. She was isolated, a hermit in a kingdom of stone, but she was not idle. Among the few possessions she'd brought was a crate of Thomas's books. He had been a man of quiet, intellectual pursuits, with a fascination for geology and engineering that his brother Marcus had openly scorned. Anya had never paid them much mind before, but now, by the steady, clean light of her lantern, she devoured them. She read about geothermal vents, about mineralogy, about the way water moved through subterranean strata. She learned the names of the rocks that surrounded her: granite, schist, quartz. The books gave a language to her reality, a framework for the miracle she had found. She began to understand the water's properties, its faint scent of sulfur, the slick, mineral feel of it on her skin. She would spend hours simply observing the spring, watching the way the convection currents made the water shimmer, the way the steam danced in the beam of light from the fissure above. She learned the rhythm of the place, the subtle shifts in temperature, the way the light moved across the chamber throughout the day. She was living inside a geological engine. Her world had shrunk to the confines of the cave system, but within that world, her mind was expanding. She was no longer just a survivor, buffeted by circumstance. She was a student, a scholar of her own strange inheritance, learning the secrets the stone had kept for millennia. The solitude did not break her, it forged her. One spring, nearly 3 years into her isolation, the outside world intruded. A man stumbled into the mouth of her cave, half frozen and disoriented, caught in a late, vicious blizzard that had swept down from the peaks without warning. He was a geologist, he explained, his teeth chattering, charting mineral deposits for a distant railroad company. His name was Rowan. Anya brought him deeper inside, towards the warmth, offering him a dipper of hot, clear water from a pot she kept simmering near a steam vent. He drank it, his eyes wide with confusion. "There's no fire," he said, his voice raspy. "How is this?" She simply led him through the final passage and into the chamber of the spring. He stopped dead, his pack sliding from his shoulder to the floor with a soft thud. He was a man of science, of maps and measurements, but what he saw rendered him speechless. He walked to the edge of the pool as if in a trance, knelt, and dipped a hand into the turquoise water. He looked at the steam, at the mineral deposits frosting the chamber walls like delicate lacework. "Incredible," he whispered, the word a prayer. "It's a travertine spring. The mineral content, the heat source must be a significant magma intrusion." He looked at her, his scientific curiosity warring with his astonishment. "You live here?" "I do," Anya said. Rowan stayed for a week, trapped by the storm. But he was not a prisoner, he was a willing student. He validated everything she had read, and taught her 100 things more. He explained how the precise composition of minerals in the water was beneficial, how the constant temperature was a gift of the deep earth. He saw not just a shelter, but a system. He looked at the small, pathetic patch of hardy green she struggled to grow near the cave mouth and had an idea. Together, using his knowledge of thermodynamics and her intimate understanding of the caves, they began to work. They chose a small, south-facing cavern with a thin ceiling. Using the pickaxe and crowbars, they carefully opened a section of it to the sky, covering it with stretched, oiled canvas to let in light but trap the heat. Then, they meticulously chipped channels into the stone floor, a network of shallow troughs leading from a small, diverted flow from the main spring. Hot water now coursed through the floor of the cavern, creating a naturally heated greenhouse. It was a work of immense labor, but their efforts were a silent, synchronized partnership. For the first time, Anya had found someone who did not see a worthless wasteland, but a place of profound potential. Word of the barons began to change, carried down the mountain not by proclamation, but in whispers. It started with a lost prospector who, seeking shelter, was given a week of warmth and food by the quiet woman in the cave, his aching joints soothed by her strange, hot pool. He told his story in the saloon down in the valley, and most dismissed it as the ramblings of a fevered mind. But a few listened. An old rancher with crippling arthritis, his fingers gnarled into useless claws, decided the difficult journey was worth the slim chance of relief. He arrived, skeptical and grim, and was met not with promises of a cure, but with a simple, dignified welcome. Anya showed him the bathing pool she had since carved from the rock, smooth and clean. After a month of soaking in the mineral-rich water, the rancher walked down the mountain with his hands unclenched for the first time in a decade. His story had the weight of truth. Slowly, organically, others followed. They were the desperate, the afflicted, those for whom the town doctor had no remedy. Anya never sought them out. She made no claims, sold no elixirs. She simply offered the warmth and the water. The settlement, which the visitors began to call Stonehaven, grew. With the help of the first few grateful souls, she expanded her network of channels, building a series of small, private stone bathhouses, each fed by the constant flow of hot water. The greenhouse, now expanded and improved with real glass panes Rowan had helped her procure, produced a surplus of fresh vegetables, a miracle in the high country. Her reputation was not that of a healer, but of a custodian. She was the quiet woman who understood the mountain, who had listened to its secrets and now shared its gifts. She charged very little, just enough to trade for the supplies she could not grow or make. People came, they stayed, they found a measure of peace or relief, and they left, leaving behind a small piece of their story, which slowly wove itself into the growing legend of the place. The comfortable mockers down in the valley heard the rumors and scoffed, dismissing it as folklore. They remembered the worthless land and the foolish widow. They could not conceive that a fortune could be built from nothing but rock and hot water. Rowan returned the following summer. He did not come as a scientist with survey tools, but as a man who had found a place he could not forget. He brought with him seeds for new kinds of plants, more books on engineering and botany, and a quiet intention that Anyar understood without him having to speak it. He had spent the winter drawing plans, dreaming of this place. He saw what could be done, how the flow of water could be managed more efficiently, how new chambers could be opened and stabilized to create living quarters that were both warm and dry. Their partnership resumed as if he had never left. They worked side by side, their days filled with the shared rhythm of physical labor and intellectual collaboration. Their conversations were sparse, focused on the task at hand, the angle of a channel, the stability of a rock wall, the needs of a particular plant. But in their shared silence, a deep and abiding affection grew. It was a love born not of courtship or poetry, but of mutual respect for competence and character. He admired her resilience, her profound connection to this place she had made her own. She admired his brilliant mind, his gentle nature, and the way he saw the world not as a thing to be conquered, but as a puzzle to be understood. One evening, sitting by the main pool, watching the steam rise into the cool night air, he took her hand. It was calloused and strong, like his own. "I've never felt more at home than I do here," Rowan said, his voice quiet. With you she did not offer a grand declaration in return. Her life had taught her the value of things that were solid and real, not things that were merely said. She simply leaned her head against his shoulder, a small gesture of complete trust and acceptance. They were married a month later, not by a preacher from the valley, but by their own vows, spoken in the great chamber. Their witnesses were the ancient stone, the eternal water, and the handful of grateful residents who now called Stonehaven home. Their union was like the place they had built, quiet, strong, and warmed from a source deep within. Years flowed by like the water itself, constant and life-giving. Stonehaven was no longer a secret. It was a small, thriving community, a sanctuary known throughout the territory. Anyar and Rowan had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who grew up with the mountain as their backyard and the warm caves as their home. They learned the names of rocks before they learned to read, and understood the principles of hydrology as a form of play. The community was self-sufficient, a marvel of simple engineering and ecological balance, all designed and overseen by Rowan, all anchored by Anyar's quiet, steady presence. But the mountain that gave them everything was also a place of immense, indifferent power. One spring, after a week of heavy rain, the ground on the western slope became unstable. There was a low, terrible rumble, a sound that shook the very foundations of the rock. A section of the cliff face above a new channel they were digging gave way. Rowan, who had gone to check the flow, was caught in the slide. The loss was absolute, a sudden, violent silence in the center of Anyar's life. The grief was a cold stone inside her, a chill that even the deepest springs could not warm. For months, she retreated, her spirit mirroring the gray, unyielding rock around her. The community held its breath, running on the systems Rowan had built, but missing its heart. Anyar would walk the passages of the caves, touching the channels he had carved, seeing his hand in every balanced stone and every thriving plant. The pain was a physical presence. But she had been forged in solitude and adversity. She understood that grief was a landscape to be navigated, not a pit to remain in. Her purpose, which had become intertwined with his, was now hers to carry alone. She emerged from her mourning not with tears, but with a new resolve. In the most stable part of the cave system, she began a new project. She built a library. It was a magnificent chamber with smooth walls and shelves carved directly from the stone, filled with all of Rowan's books and any others she could acquire. It was a monument to his mind, his curiosity, his belief in knowledge. The Rowan Thorne Library became the intellectual heart of Stonehaven, a place where his legacy would continue to teach and inspire, a testament to the man who had helped her turn a worthless inheritance into a paradise. Time continued its patient work of wearing down mountains and memories. Down in the valley, the Thorne cattle ranch had not fared well. Marcus, for all his bluster, was a poor manager, a man who mistook ownership for expertise. A series of harsh winters, followed by a prolonged drought, decimated his herds. He made bad investments, chasing speculative ventures that collapsed, until all that was left was the land itself, mortgaged and barren in its own way. He died a bitter, indebted man. His wife, Beatrice, lived on, a relic of a past grandeur, her wealth a memory and her body a cage of pain. Her joints, swollen and stiff with arthritis, became her daily tormentors. The town doctor could do nothing for her. It was then, in her desperation, that she began to truly listen to the stories about Stonehaven. She remembered her cruel words in the lawyer's office decades ago, the image of Anya, the quiet, foolish widow, heading to a life of ruin among the bats and rocks. The irony was a bitter draught. Finally, swallowing the last of her pride, she paid a boy to take her up the mountain in a rickety wagon. The journey was agonizing. When she arrived, she was a stooped and trembling old woman, a world away from the confident, sharp-tongued matron she had once been. Anya met her at the entrance. She was older now, her face lined with the story of her life, but her posture was as straight and dignified as it had been that day in the lawyer's office. She looked at Beatrice, seeing not the architect of her past humiliation, but simply a woman in pain. There was no flicker of triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction. "You are welcome here," Anya said, her voice the same low, even tone Beatrice remembered. "Come inside." Into the warmth Beatrice wept, her sobs echoing in the quiet entrance. She was led to a private bath, the warm, mineral-rich water easing her aching bones. Later, Anya's children, one a gifted botanist managing the greenhouses, the other a skilled engineer maintaining his father's systems, greeted her with a simple, quiet courtesy. They were the stewards of a legacy Beatrice could not comprehend, a fortune built not on what could be taken from the land, but on what it was willing to give. Anya sat in her usual place, on a smooth stone ledge overlooking the main pool. She was old now, her body frail, but her eyes were as clear as the turquoise water before her. She watched as one of her great-grandchildren, a little girl with Rowan's curious eyes, dipped a toe into a shallow, warm channel, her laughter echoing softly in the great, sunlit chamber. She thought back to that day in the dusty office, to the deed for a plot of land considered worthless. The world measured value in acreage for cattle, in veins of gold, in timber to be felled. Men like Marcus saw land as a thing to be exploited, its surface riches scraped away and spent. They had looked at the barrens and seen only its deficiencies, an absence of the things they understood. They could not imagine a wealth that lay hidden, a power that was not claimed but received. Her inheritance, she realized, had not been the rock itself. It was the heat. It was the relentless, elemental energy of the planet's core, bleeding up through a fissure to touch the surface world. It was a legacy of pure potential, invisible to the greedy eye. It could not be mined, or fenced, or counted like cattle. It could only be channeled, respected, and shared. Stonehaven had become more than a sanctuary for the ailing. It was a different way of living, a community built on a principle of symbiosis rather than extraction. They had not conquered the mountain, they had entered into a partnership with it. The water was the source, the constant, flowing heart of it all. It had been here for millennia before her, and it would be here for millennia after she was gone. It had warmed her, healed her visitors, nurtured her children, and carried her through the deepest grief. She had been its first custodian, but she would not be its last. The mockers in the valley had inherited a fortune that could be spent, and so it was. She had inherited a source that could not be depleted, and so it endured. A wisp of steam rose from the water, catching the light and dissolving into the air, a quiet exhalation from the deep, warm heart of the world.